Hello everyone, welcome to the podcast series of The New Normal Together Apart. This podcast series is funded by Faculty of Arts of Hong Kong Baptist University as a research to document the voices of the marginalized in Hong Kong, especially during the pandemic. So today we are very glad to have Mr. Innocent Mutanga here. So Innocent, I've known you for quite some time, but you being one of the founders of the Africa Centre Hong Kong, I'm sure a great story to tell us about the centre and also the African diaspora community in Hong Kong. So to start with, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and also a little bit about the centre?
Yeah, my name is Innocent, and I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, and I've been here for almost 8 years now. What do they say? No, I hang on now, and I came here as a refugee, and then later on, I ended up going to school here, graduated here, studied anthropology at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and then found the center, sometime just before my graduation.
Right, thank you very much. So speaking about your study at university, I'm just wondering what brought you to anthropology in the first place?
I thought, I think it was a mix of two things, circumstantial as well as, interest and the networks that I've built up in that particular point. I met some people who were anthropologists, when they're doing their field work, and then I thought, oh, this stuff is quite interesting in a way. But, it wasn't only that aspect, but also, growing up, I grew up in multiple, ethnic context, because I lived with different people, different families, different languages, different cultures, and I sort of, in some way, I was, a child anthropologist without the training, because I had to be, participating and observing a lot of these things as potentially an outsider in the new community. So I think there was a way of seeing the world that once I got sort of like an understanding of what anthropology was, and then I was like, I think this fits with what, I have come to be, as well as I felt like anthropology kind of gives that holistic perspective that helps to understand the more complex world, more globalized world that we are getting into, the world of differences. I think this is probably, it's only getting more and more where differences are getting highlighted, are getting appreciated, whereas in the past, differences were sort of suppressed. You just needed to aspire to be white, a white male Christian, and then that was sort of the standard. But now the world is decentralizing our standards. There's not that aspect of standards, so differences are being appreciated more. So I felt like anthropology kind of, in some way, gives people the sense of, that safety that comes, safety around differences, where people can be themselves and appreciate it and be able to leverage that. So I just felt like it's just the best thing for me then.
Right, thank you. So speaking of diversity, complexity, decentralizing, I think that has a lot to do with the very reason why you and the others founded the Africa Centre as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that was, one of the things where we felt like, of course, when it comes to the narratives on the Africanness or blackness, as terrible as it may sound, it had been shaped primarily by the colonialists. And in some way, they still want to shape it, but I think it's time that we felt like it's important that we Africans take over the narrative, and decide how people feel about us and decide how people think about us, especially in Asia, where there's not that much of a history of, oppressing blacks and all that stuff. So it's a good place to start, so that people don't kind of import some of those, racist narratives that the Westerners have curated so carefully for so many years. So it's, I feel like it's important that we start to work on rebranding how people think of Africans. That's one aspect. And then the second aspect also on the starting with the center as well is, the idea of black consciousness or Afro consciousness, which, fundamentally, of course, going back, it's unfortunate that we always have to sort of deal with all this very racist past where people have had not to appreciate themselves. Black people sometimes have to feel like, oh my God, I can only be better if I'm whiter, if I'm lighter skinned, if I'm sophisticated in white people's institutions. So that is, we sort of, fighting to improve that consciousness that they can be able to be proud of themselves. And in many ways leverage and understand that they are better positioned for the future, based on all this unfairness that happened in the past, that prepares them better for the future, than most people. So, that's sort of like the context on how we ended up, starting the center.
Right. We're going to talk about the center in just a minute, but I know that what you do for a living is not so highly relevant to anthropology or the center. So would you mind telling us a little bit more about what do you do and how do you reconcile with the gap with what you do and your work at the center?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to running the center, I also work in finance and investment banking. In many ways, I always feel like, there's that underdogness, that comes with somebody coming from an anthropological background, coming into finance. But at the end of the day, the markets, which is what we look at on a day-to-day basis, they are a result of how people feel and how people respond to things. And a lot of ways how people respond to things is very cultural and very context-based. So in some way, I feel like the training that I would have gotten in my studies in humanities, it sort of even prepares me to have a better appreciation of context. Whereas some people would wish that people respond the same to the same event. It's not like that. It's totally not like that. And events shape markets. So in a way, I feel like I'll be better positioned to have a more accurate view on the markets, but when it's so in a way, it's another perspective of looking at the world. By looking at these numbers and these graphs and these charts, I think you're seeing a more macro view of things, but an anthropological perspective as well as what I do in the community, it takes me from the ground. There's the whole macro and then sort of like a macro perspective, so that I can understand things from those. So in a way, I feel like it becomes even much more holistic in how I sort of make decisions, how I think of myself, how I think of other people. So it's I don't see it as contradictory, but I see it as coming from both sides, and those views come together.
So in that sense, we talk about having different perspectives, looking at the same people, looking at the society. And that would also be what is sitting as the core of the center, celebrating plurality, celebrating multiplicity. And in that sense, what were the original objectives of you and the others setting up the center?
I think one was just the need within the community that I was in, which is basically Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. People were asking a lot, like, oh, could you come and talk about this? Want to learn about this? Want to learn about this? So I'm just feeling like, oh, we seem to be so much in demand. Everybody wants a little piece of Africa, in one aspect or the other. What I wasn't particularly happy with, it was mostly the more elite who were more interested in actually training their children to be more equipped. Because, whether people like it or not, a lot of these people in the elite, in the community, they tend to actually understand the larger cycles that are happening in the world, and whether things are shifting, what's more important, what's the best way to position their children. They're willing to put so much money in simply making sure their children are on top of the society. So I knew there was a need. Given the whole context of all the uncertainties around Asia, all the changes, there's been very dramatic changes going on within the region. So there was that need, and so a lot of people felt like maybe we have something to offer. So that gave me the confidence that if we start a center, there's definitely people who are going to feel it. We're going to be able to have activities, we can run things, because I know there are people who have the need. So I knew there was demand. So I think that is one thing that gave me the confidence, in a sense. But on the other hand, I also felt like, with the whole shift in the hegemony, in the sense of the U.S., Western Europe, things aren't really going well that side. Some people write like it's in an irreversible fall, which to me is good news, because the time that the white people have been in power, I'm telling you, we've been humiliated, we were raped, we were enslaved. Everything you could think of happened to black people. So if you tell me that the hegemony or the administration that is enslaving you is killing you, every time I see people getting killed in America, if that hegemony is going down, why should I cry? I should celebrate. I should have a party. So in some way there is that idea that there is a fall in hegemony, and on the other hand we see I think the Asian side getting more significant in a sense. So like I think the timing is just about right. That well before these people in Asia start thinking they are so important, we gotta make sure we have cleared out the path. We have already reframed the whole conversation that's happening around black people. That we set the pace. It's not like go to the Western world to talk about the Africans. No, like direct, conversations, direct understanding. So there was that. I think that was, even if there was no demand in people wanting to learn more about the African perspective, we would have created the demand, because we feel like it's a very, very important time. It's a very crucial time. It's a very critical time.
Yeah, that is indeed a great idea. I mean, you have generated momentum of transferring knowledge to the wider public in Hong Kong. But how about the process of finding the center? Was it difficult?
I think for me, it wasn't difficult, to be honest. I'd spent a good number of years when I was in Hong Kong. I was just drafting what we're gonna do. And then the other thing is also that I did work for a center which was run by the Americans in Africa, in Zimbabwe to be specific, at some point. And I knew what kind of propaganda, how they used to do their things as well. So I kind of have that experience as well in terms of how they run a center. So me having worked in a center that was being run by the U.S. government, I had experience. So a lot of people usually don't know that. They just think maybe magically do things. I'm like, no, I actually had experience. You need training. I actually had tons of experience in terms of how a center runs. And then that experience plus just, the whole drafting period that I've been doing ever since when I had time, it's, I think the thing we started with was a book club. And there was a reason why I started the book club. One, of course, I had experience of running a book club when I was working with the American government. But on the other hand, I felt that it's important that we show to the people that Africans we target in the mind. Because before it was always the heart. The idea by the heart is the idea of manipulating the heart, charity stuff and all that stuff. That's usually whenever Africa is spoken of, like, oh, we're going to talk about Africans. Everybody's prepared to take their tissue, so that, at the end they have to throw away the donation box, So we wanted to change that. We're like, guys, we are interested in thinking and no manipulation of the heart, but actual critical engagement, which involves the mind. So I thought the book club, starting with the book club, was a clear message on what we are interested in.
Yeah. I think my first engagement with the center started with the book club as well.
So that's what we wanted people to do. That's what I wanted people to engage with. I wanted to really carry the book club for longer until people really get a sense like, we are all interested in the intellectual. We want to have that conversations. We are not here for manipulating anybody's heart or any of that stuff. It's like, develop your own perspective and, let's engage from there. And we hope that's going to be the way we shape every other activity we do going forward.
In that sense, I think that is really genuine exchanges between minds, between people. That makes a lot of people, not necessarily from the African diaspora community, but people of all other racial, ethnic backgrounds who feel a huge sense of, coziness at the center. So speaking of that, I think lots of people, lots of attendants here also feel a strong sense of home when they're here at the center. And I also know that at the very beginning, the center didn't start with a physical location. So in that sense, I'm just wondering how important is it to have a physical location of the center?
I think it's very important, at least for people to know that there is this space. You come once, you know the space is there, and then you can come back, or you can tell the person to come back as well. But the whole idea of, because you can meet in a hotel and have the conversation, but we are not the ones that are shaping the hospitality. We are not the ones, because we believe, that's another thing that you would hear, people like Walter Rodney, the historian, talking about. Like, usually people talk about, monuments and stuff in African history, but what they miss out is the everydayness. Things like the hospitality of the African people. That's something that stands out that a lot. So we feel like if we have a space, then we shape the atmosphere. We shape the way we engage with people, and that's even much more powerful, because that's what we are very good at. And I'm not like hospital, but in the idea of creating the atmosphere where people feel like they can be themselves. Of course, when you read about Africans on the news, it's just like conflict. I don't know. These are conflict people. What? Conflict and stuff. But I'm like, no. People are missing out. Like if you actually get, you come here. What I hope is that whether you are gay, whether you're straight, you're supposed to feel that safetyness and being able to feel empowered just to be yourself. So that's what I think is very African in a sense. So we wanted to create that atmosphere, and that people can experience. It's not entirely the best space. You'd have to be in Africa, but we can create that atmosphere and can experience the everydayness of what Africanness is, or blackness is, and I think it's powerful. Yeah.
Right. So in that sense, I think the empowerment of human agency is what really makes the place very vital. So, people drop by every now and then, even they don't know what is happening, what is going on at the center.
People just come in, they don't even know, they don't even check what's going on. Like, I'm sure I'm gonna be fine. I like that, and in many ways it reflects how some of us were raised. It's like you don't have to put an appointment in at least where I grew up to come and in a place. So like, yeah, come in, yeah. We're eating, let's eat together, so it's like that, yeah.
Right. So I think it's, now we know that, a lot of people regard the center as their home, that's their family. But I know that, with the COVID, it also blocks, a lot of people from visiting their family or connecting with them. So would you mind also telling us a little bit about your family, and also perhaps how do you stay in touch with them during the pandemic?
Yeah, the whole question of family, I recall when I was in primary school, they asked me to write my mother's name on the form. And then I asked them, which mother should I write? And then the teacher was like, write your mother. I'm like, I have so many mothers. Which one of those? Of course, you already highlighted, of course, there is whole idea of immediate family. I didn't have that concept growing up. But in the frame of the question, I have one brother, one sister, and my mother, so that's like, they are both older, so it's, I was born and spent a good deal of my time in a mining town, and then in the rural parts of Zimbabwe as well, but I think, as a whole, it's the 3 children in the family. I think it was always exciting, having the girl and then the boy and then the boy, I think it was very, fascinating. And so, just being raised by a single mother as well, that was also something as well. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how do you stay in touch with your family during the pandemic, and was it important for you to be in touch with them, know that they're all right?
The idea for me was to go every Christmas, that because I'm really terrible at responding to messages and all that stuff. I'm really one of the worst. It's just that I have too many messages, but it's usually hard to respond. So I'm like, you know what, guys, I'll ignore your messages now, but in December I'm coming, and then I'll pay back for all my sins. I don't know how I have to pay back, I'm like, now I feel like I paid back and I come back. So that was my plan. So now I couldn't really go last Christmas, but so far, we tried to have calls, WhatsApp calls, calling, WhatsApp chats. There are all these groups, that people post things. I don't really post much, but whenever I have time, I go through seeing what people are posting. All the family groups. We have a big family, and see. So usually that's that's usually how we stay in touch.
Right. So speaking of the COVID and your family relationships, so do you still recall the very first time you heard the pandemic is happening? So when it first struck Hong Kong and other places in the world, what was your reaction? And were you worried about your family and your community in Hong Kong?
Well, the data at that point, indicated that, COVID would have a hard time in some temperate environment. Some like, and I was like, what? Yeah, that's good. We're in the warmer side. That's I'm like, yeah, that's was I worried? I wasn't, as much worried. I don't know what would have worried me in a sense, because, if you go to the rural areas, you don't meet anybody. You just stay in there. If no transportation, that means you're all fine. So, there was that aspect as well, that people, there is no need perhaps for traveling. People can just stay. You go to your farm, you're very self-sustainable, you subsistence farming, you do the things. So no need for actually, in a sense, to be very, very much concerned. But I was also confident because I spoke this with one of my colleagues, that the fact that COVID is hitting the rich people, they'll come out of the vaccine very soon. That was my bigger faith in it. I know if COVID had hit in Congo and probably remained to be localized there, we ain't going to have vaccine for the next 20 years. But the fact that it's hitting rich people, and China starting there, Shanghai, Hong Kong, all these financial marketplaces, I was like, I told you, don't worry, this time chill out. These people, they spend so much money in just making sure they don't go bald, what more COVID? They are going to work out something. So I told are you sure? I'm like, I know, because I am from Africa. Whenever we have had outbreaks there, nobody cares. You have to find ways to navigate it, but nobody's going to come out the vaccine, no. But this one, I was very confident that they'll push it through. And, of course, a lot of people, died before the vaccine was, was out there. But I was pretty confident. If you want a disease to be suppressed quickly, just let it hit the rich place. They will work out something. It's not like they are smarter, no. It's just that the money that they've accumulated, they could use it to come up with things.
And it turns out that you're very right, in the sense that we now got vaccines. And I think you were also really correct in terms of talking about the differences between rural area and urban places like Hong Kong. And I'm just wondering, how about the situation in Hong Kong? Hong Kong is obviously a very crowded city. You bump into each other every now and then. So are you worried about the African diaspora community in Hong Kong?
Am I worried? Okay, here's the thing. We have not had any known case that has impacted a black person in Hong Kong. No one black person got COVID, at least to our knowledge, in Hong Kong. Well, that's a good thing. Because if one black person got COVID, the media is going to highlight that. A black person has gotten COVID. And you know that nobody's going to sit next to you. You get into a restaurant, people are going to run away from you. So it's, I remember the Ebola time, because we were like, no, that was traumatic, guys. We don't want that now, So we tell our people, guys, let's make sure we don't get COVID, okay? Because remember the Ebola time? Everybody was calling us Ebola. Everybody was running away from us, But this time, I'm like, well, whatever chance, we haven't gotten the COVID. So I think that has been quite, in some way very, very good. But overall, a lot of people did lose jobs. And a lot of people are in the entertainment industry, within the black communities, be singers, and those also, couldn't have gigs, could not have, no gatherings. So that impacted in terms of income generation for a lot of individuals and families as well. Hong Kong is very service. A lot of people, service industry, a lot of people did to actually be in person. So a lot of people did get impacted significantly in terms of losing their income generating endeavors.
Yeah, indeed. I'm so glad that you brought up, how media sometimes could be inaccurate in terms of portraying, imposing images, stereotypes on the diaspora community in Hong Kong. And I'm really glad that, with this podcast, people will have a clear idea of how the community is doing. But speaking of jobs, those are really practical, realistic situations that a lot of people have to face. So how difficult is it, as far as you know?
You mean for the people?
Yeah.
Well, I think it was hard in the sense that a lot of companies where people working, they're not run by Africans. So you were likely one of the first ones to be cut out, whenever the company is trying to cut costs. So in a sense, that was hard, But I think what we've been trying to do is to encourage people to start their own companies, or those that are existing to actually grow them up so that they can be able to have the capacity. That's the lesson we learned. If you ask most of the lesson learned from this experience of COVID, is that we need to have companies that are run by Africans and growing well and be able to employ the people. In that aspect, you know that you're not the first person to be cut out whenever they're trying to cut costs. Yeah.
Right, in that sense, so if we are going to draw, not every single one of us are involved in African history. Lots of people just come to Hong Kong to study and, work in other sectors. But when it comes to perhaps having a really general picture of the most difficult, the toughest time during the COVID being a Black person in Hong Kong, how would you comment on that?
What would be the toughest one? I think the toughest, overall, I think the toughest thing is the limited network. Because they are people who own the means of production, and we don't have many of our people there. Of course, that means breaking into a multitude of these industries, being able to succeed. It takes a lot of work. So I think the limited network, even with COVID, that means if this doesn't work, it's harder to find somewhere else that works because your network is still within kind of limited. So, sort of that, I think that's probably the main issue that, that COVID highlighted in terms of the weaknesses of what the Black communities face, is that they don't have a much more expansive network. Yeah.
Right. And so in that sense, you're talking about, network. And this is what the center is about, right? Keeping people together regardless of your backgrounds, where you come from. So what are you and the center doing? Before the COVID, during the COVID?
That's one of the things we try to do, right? Like, is to, the idea of connecting communities. We do realize there are people out there, there are people there. So how can we create a platform that people can be able to network, with the dinner meetups, networking lunches, networking events, or just people coming in and getting to, to bring people from these different groups and be able to build that particular network. That's really, because I see this as one of the fundamental problems that the Africans or the Black people face in Asia overall, but in Hong Kong in particular. So it's important that we really expand the network. We need to push it harder and harder and harder, that we have people, who pull strings everywhere. Because otherwise, if we don't have people pulling strings in all these many places, then it's harder. Yeah.
Right. So in that sense, I also know that there are always lots of events at the center. And those events are always important in keeping people within the network and keep the momentum running. So I'm just wondering, how were those events affected by the COVID, perhaps in terms of attendance?
Here's the thing. We started having this physical space at the beginning of COVID. So in some way, we kind of cannot tell what it would look like without COVID. So everything we've been doing so far has been during the pandemic. If you can have, let's say, about 300 people come during a week, whether students or it's this one, I think for me that looks good compared to what I see around. That looks good. But the good thing, though, that came out of COVID for us was that a lot of organizations, schools, corporations, they're working with these vendors who were doing programs for their students, programs for their employees, and those vendors disappeared And then we as Africans, we're like, guys, we never had a chance. Now this is our chance. These people are abandoning the people who have been working. So we started establishing a lot of partnerships with a lot of organizations, schools, and then we managed to really sign a lot of contracts. That COVID going down, I think we are positioned for even much more better things. I think this perhaps, COVID, yes, it was horrible, but I think in terms of, because we run programs, that's how we sustain ourselves. You know, we run programs, we generate revenue. In terms of that, I think we were positioned perfectly. Because when we were going to school A, they had nobody. Everybody abandoned them. And you go there, you're like, they abandoned you. We are here. We can offer you the service. I'm like, yeah, but we don't know. We'll offer it maybe next year. I'm like, that's okay. Let's sign the contract now. We'll offer it next year. So I think what people are not aware of is that how much we have gained in terms of the contracts, in terms of the relationships that we have built during this particular period. We've built so much relationships that I think are going to be good for revenue, also are going to be very good for impact. So it's going to be, people are going to be shocked when their kids are all coming back home in the future just talking Africa, Africa this, Africa this, Africa this. They don't know it's coming. Yeah.
Right, so I think you have provided a really beautiful picture in terms of, even though we're living in the era of COVID, but, at the same time, we're also finding ways to live with it. And most importantly, not stopping you and the others doing with the center what you started with. And I just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your, the people, communities that you partner with. What do you do with them, and how do you, what do they gain from, partnering with the center?
Well, I mean, we if it's a school, we would train their students. Be it a leadership training or service learning programs or, or just a cultural sharing. But at the end of the day, what we believe is that these students or these kids are growing up in a very uncertain environment, and to be able to understand and add to their framework of understanding things, they definitely need us. They definitely need us. Whether they know it or they don't know it, they may not know it now, but we tell you like, yeah, you do need us. The past is over, where you only needed to know the white perspective and you're successful. That's all you needed in the past. I know this very well. I grew up in a country just colonized by the whites. But now, they definitely need us. So that's what we can bring in, that perspective to analyzing situations, to navigating uncertainties, to develop themselves into true global citizens who understands and appreciate differences. And realize the power and the potential that diversity and differences bring to the table. So that's what we can bring to them.
Yeah, and in that sense, it was pretty ironic, right? It is only with the COVID, when the COVID started, that we have this real chance of engaging with people and also training people with a sort of broader, more global perspectives. And that get to know to places and cultures that they don't really have time, they don't really have the chance to connect with. So I'm just wondering, when you look into the future and, visualizing the COVID easing out and, people begin to travel. So I just wondering, what kinds of impacts do you foresee in those days in the near future?
Well, I think it's going to be very dynamic. As I said, we've established a lot of relationships. That's going to be a lot of people, a lot of different people coming in, post-COVID. It's exciting in many ways. It's going to be exciting. Like, we probably will be complaining about our own capacity in handling the crowds, in handling in actually being able to make sure the impact is quality level. So I think that's sort of like the direction that things are going to.
All right. So that's to say, even after the COVID, you'll be, keep mutating, keep adapting to this kind of new normals.
Of course, we're Africans. That's all we know. Adaptation. What Charles Darwin said. The one that survives. Not just the fittest. It's the one that adapts to change. That's all we know. That's what I always tell the Africans. Like, guys, remember what you learned the most. Don't try to be white. Try to be you. We adapt to change just like that. I've had to go through, various steps. So I think it's, that's what it's going to keep us floating.
Right, and I think this is exactly the sense of resilience, the sense of momentum, the sense of resistance that we could move forward under all the different kinds of circumstances. So thank you very much, Innocent, again for being with us, and all of you who are listening. So please keep an eye on our more updates on the podcast. Thank you.